The shuttle docked with a low hum that Katie Marsh felt in her teeth. She stood near the back of the group, hands clasped behind her, watching through the viewport as the massive ring of Concord Station grew larger and larger until it swallowed the sky. It was the biggest thing she had ever seen, built by living hands. Miles and miles of metal, curving in every direction, covered in lights that blinked in patterns she did not recognize. Somewhere inside that station, 12 humans were expected to sit down, shut up, and learn how to be proper members of the galaxy. Katie was one of those 12. She had not asked for this assignment. 6 months ago, she had been running tactical drills aboard the carrier UES Gallant, stationed near Jupiter. She was good at her job. Not flashy, not loud, but good. The kind of officer who noticed things others missed. The kind who could look at a battlefield and see the shape of what was about to happen before it happened. That was why they picked her. Not for her rank, not for her medals, for her mind. The airlock opened, and the human delegation stepped onto the station in a single line. The air smelled different here, clean, but strange, like metal and flowers mixed together. The corridors were wide enough for species twice the size of humans, and the lighting shifted in soft waves, adjusting to the biology of whoever walked through. Katie noticed that it turned slightly warmer and more yellow as she passed. It was reading her, learning her. She filed that thought away and kept walking. A tall figure waited for them at the end of the corridor. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, with skin the color of dark stone and eyes that burned a dull orange. His uniform was decorated with symbols that Katie could not read, but she understood their meaning well enough. They meant power. They meant authority. They meant that this being had earned his place through centuries of service, and he expected everyone around him to know it. This was High Strategist Torvon of the Velnaric Dominion. He looked down at the humans the way a person might look at children arriving for their first day of school. Not cruel, but not kind either. Patient in the way that someone is patient when they already know how the story ends. "Welcome to Concord Station," he said. His voice was deep and carried a vibration that Katie felt in her chest. "You are here because your species has been granted provisional membership in the Galactic Integration Council. This is not a gift. It is a test. Over the next 6 months, you will study galactic law, trade systems, and military doctrine under the instruction of elder species who have walked among the stars for thousands of years before your kind learned to make fire." He paused and let that sink in. "You will attend every session. You will complete every exercise. You will demonstrate that humanity is capable of learning, adapting, and contributing to the galactic order. If you fail, your species will be reviewed for continued membership." Katie did not react. She kept her face still and her breathing even. Around her, some of the other humans shifted on their feet. A few looked nervous. One looked angry. But Katie just watched Torvon the way she watched everything, carefully, quietly, and completely. The first weeks passed in a blur of lectures and simulations. The classrooms were enormous amphitheaters filled with dozens of species. The Dreth sat in clusters, their insectoid bodies clicking softly as they processed information. The Hurons sprawled in oversized chairs, their thick tails hanging over the edges. Smaller species Katie had no names for yet floated in gravity-adjusted seats near the ceiling. And in the middle rows, the 12 humans sat together, looking very small and very new. Torvon taught military doctrine 3 times a week. His lectures were detailed, precise, and filled with examples drawn from 4,000 years of Velnoric military history. He spoke about fleet formations, the way a poet might speak about language, with deep love and absolute certainty that his way was the right way. He walked the students through legendary battles, explained the reasoning behind every maneuver, and occasionally paused to ask questions that made even the Dreth hesitate. Every other species took notes. The Dreth used chemical pads that recorded information through scent. The Huron carved symbols into tablets with their claws. The humans typed furiously on their datapads, fingers flying across screens, trying to capture every word. Every human except Katie. She sat in the same seat every session. Third row, far left. She kept her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes followed Torvon as he moved across the stage, but she never once reached for her datapad. It sat dark and untouched on the desk beside her. At first, nobody noticed. There were hundreds of students. But Torvon was not the kind of instructor who missed things. By the end of the second week, he had noticed. By the end of the third week, it was bothering him. She was not sleeping. She was not distracted. Her eyes were sharp and present. She was clearly paying attention. But she recorded nothing. She saved nothing. And when he reviewed the practice scenarios, her scores were average. Not bad, not exceptional. Just enough to pass without drawing attention. It did not make sense. On the first day of the fourth week, after a 2-hour lecture on orbital siege tactics that had left even the Dreth struggling to keep up, Torvon stepped down from the stage and walked directly to Katie's seat. The room went quiet. The other humans stared with wide eyes. Torvon stood over her, his orange eyes burning down. "Human Marsh," he said, "I have watched you for 3 weeks. You sit, you listen, but you do not record my teachings. You do not save my diagrams. You do not review my materials." He tilted his head slightly. "Do you believe yourself above this instruction?" Katie looked up at him. She did not stand. She did not flinch. She met his gaze with the steady calm of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. "No, High Strategist," she said. Her voice was quiet, but clear enough for the entire room to hear. "I don't take notes because you're instructing my replacement." The room fell completely silent. Even the floating species near the ceiling stopped moving. Torvon's eyes narrowed. He stared at her for a long moment, searching her face for a joke, a bluff, or an explanation. He found nothing but calm certainty. He straightened up, turned, and walked back to the stage without another word. But something had changed. Katie could feel it in the air. The question had been asked, and she had answered it. And now, whether they understood it or not, everyone on that station knew that something about the quiet human in the third row was very, very different. 7,000 miles above the Nevada desert, a satellite relayed a signal that had traveled across half the galaxy in the time it took a person to blink. The signal was small, tiny even. It carried no voice, no video, no message that any normal system would recognize. But deep beneath the sand and rock, inside a facility that did not appear on any map, a machine was listening. The machine had a name. It was called Echo. Greg Holt sat in front of a wall of monitors, his third cup of coffee growing cold beside his keyboard. He was 41 years old, thin in the way that people get when they forget to eat regularly, and his eyes had the slightly unfocused look of someone who had been staring at data for too many hours. He rubbed his face with both hands and looked at the main screen again. The numbers were impossible, and yet there they were. Echo had processed another 62 hours of Katie's neural feed overnight. Every lecture she attended, every face she looked at, every word she heard, every room she walked through, all of it had been captured by the tiny relay embedded at the base of her skull and transmitted back to this facility in real time. Echo did not just receive the information, it experienced it. It saw what Katie saw, heard what she heard, and then it did something that no alien species would have believed possible. It learned. Not the way a computer learns, by storing data in neat rows and columns. Echo learned the way a mind learns, by connecting things, by finding patterns, by building understanding on top of understanding, until the knowledge became something alive and flexible and dangerous. Greg pulled up the latest benchmark results. 3 weeks ago, he had fed Echo a set of historical Velnoric battle scenarios, the same ones Torvan was teaching in his lectures. Simple ones at first. Skirmishes, border disputes, small fleet actions with clear right answers. Echo had solved them all in seconds. So Greg gave it harder ones. Full-scale engagements, multi-front wars, scenarios with incomplete information, unreliable allies, and shifting objectives. The kind of problems that took Velnoric war colleges years to teach their officers to handle. Echo solved those too, faster each time. And then 2 days ago, Echo had done something that made Greg set down his coffee and stare at his screen for a full 10 minutes without moving. It had taken a famous Velnoric victory, a battle that was studied in every military academy in the known galaxy, and found a flaw in it. Not a small flaw, a fundamental one. The winning strategy, which had been celebrated for over 1,000 years, had a weakness that no one had ever noticed. Echo found it in 40 seconds, and then generated 3 alternative strategies that would have won the battle faster, with fewer losses, and with more strategic advantage afterward. Greg had checked the work himself. Then he had 2 other analysts check it. Then he ran it through 3 independent simulation models. Echo was right. He leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. This was the moment he had been working toward for 3 years, and now that it was here, it scared him more than anything had ever scared him in his life. The project had started small. The idea was simple on paper, even if the technology was anything but. Human brains were remarkable at pattern recognition, at intuition, at making leaps of logic that no conventional computer could replicate. But human brains were also slow, forgetful, and trapped inside fragile bodies that needed sleep and food, and could be killed by a stray bullet. What if you could take the best parts of a human mind, the creativity, the intuition, the ability to see connections, and build a system around it that never got tired, never forgot, and could process information 1,000,000 times faster? That was Echo. Katie had volunteered for the neural mapping 2 years before the Concord Station assignment. It had taken 8 months of deep scanning to create a complete model of her neural architecture. Every connection, every pathway, every subtle pattern that made her mind work the way it did. The result was not a copy of Katie. It was not her personality, her memories, or her identity. It was the shape of her thinking, the structure of her reasoning, built into a system that could grow and evolve on its own. But it needed input. It needed experience. A mind without experience is just an empty room, no matter how well built. That was why Katie was on Concord Station. To learn for Echo. Greg stood up and walked to the observation window that looked down into the main processing chamber. Echo's hardware filled a room the size of a basketball court. Rows and rows of quantum processing units hummed behind climate-controlled glass, their surfaces flickering with light that moved in patterns Greg had long since stopped trying to follow. It was beautiful in a way that made him uncomfortable. There was something alive about it. His phone buzzed. He looked down and saw the name on the screen. Admiral Nora Beckett. He answered. "Greg," she said. Her voice was calm and direct, the way it always was. Nora Beckett was not a woman who wasted words. She had commanded Earth's defense fleet for 6 years, and had overseen the creation of Project Looking Glass from the beginning. "I've read your latest report. Tell me I'm reading it wrong." "You're not." There was a pause. "Echo is outperforming Velnoric strategic doctrine." "Yes." "Consistently." "Yes." "How far ahead?" Greg looked down at the processing chamber. The lights flickered and danced. "It's hard to put a number on it," he said. "But based on current projections, if we deployed Echo as a central strategic intelligence today, there is no known species in the galactic record that could match it in fleet-level combat planning." The silence on the other end of the line lasted a long time. "And it's still learning," Nora said. It was not a question. Every minute of every day, Greg confirmed. Everything Katie sees, Echo sees. Everything she hears, Echo hears. And it doesn't just store it, it builds on it. It's developing original tactical frameworks now. Strategies that don't exist in any database, from any species. It's not just catching up to the Velnoric anymore, Admiral. It's leaving them behind. He heard Nora exhale slowly. I'm authorizing Phase 2, she said. Full integration into the defense grid. Start building the interface. Admiral, are you sure? If the Council finds out what we're doing... The Council invited us to sit in a classroom and learn to be good little members of their galaxy, Nora said, and for the first time, there was something hard and sharp in her voice. They expected us to be grateful students. They didn't expect us to be what we actually are. And what's that? Fast learners. She hung up. Greg put the phone down and looked at Echo's processing chamber one more time. The lights were moving faster now, like thoughts racing through a mind that was growing larger and more powerful with every passing second. Somewhere out in the galaxy, Katie Marsh was sitting in a classroom, hands folded, eyes open, feeding a machine that was about to change everything. And nobody out there had any idea. The announcement came on a Tuesday. Torvald stood at the center of the amphitheater, his stone-colored arms folded behind his back, and told the students that the time for theory was over. They had spent weeks listening. Now they would do. The simulation exercise is a tradition as old as this station, he said, his deep voice filling the room like a drum. You will be placed into mixed species teams. You will be given command of a virtual fleet. You will face a historical battle scenario drawn from real engagements. The scenario will not be easy. It is not designed to be easy. It is designed to show you who you are when the pressure comes. Katie listened from her usual seat. Third row, far left. Hands folded, face calm. Your teams have been assigned, Torvald continued. You will find your designations on your datapads. Report to Simulation Hall 4 at 0800 tomorrow. Do not be late. Katie looked at her datapad for the first time in weeks. Her team was listed in simple text. 2 Dreth, designated Kiv Olan and Suv Resk. 1 Huron, designated Bron Toll, and her. 4 beings from 3 species who had never worked together, thrown into a battle that would test everything they had learned. She was listed last. No leadership role, no special designation, just a name at the bottom of a list. She smiled very slightly and set the datapad down. That night, she lay in her bunk in the human quarters and stared at the ceiling. The relay at the base of her skull hummed so faintly that she had almost forgotten it was there. Almost. She could not feel Echo the way you feel another person in a room. It was more like knowing that somewhere, very far away, something was thinking alongside her, waiting. She closed her eyes and slept deeply for the first time in weeks. The next morning, Simulation Hall 4 was a controlled chaos of alien bodies and nervous energy. The hall was enormous, a circular room lined with command consoles arranged in clusters, each one representing a team's bridge. Holographic projectors filled the center of the room with a massive 3-dimensional map of empty space, waiting to be populated with fleets and objectives. Katie found her team at Console 7. The 2 Dreth were already there, their segmented bodies hunched over the displays, multi-jointed fingers tapping rapidly as they reviewed pre-simulation data. They moved in perfect coordination with each other, occasionally exchanging clicks and chirps that their translators did not bother to convert. Private communication, Dreth to Dreth. Bron Toll arrived last. He was big, even by Huron standards. Nearly 7 feet of scaled muscle and bone, with a jaw that could crush metal, and eyes the color of old rust. He dropped into his oversized chair and looked at his 3 teammates with undisguised disappointment. 2 bugs and a human, he growled. Outstanding. Kivolan, the elder of the 2 Dreth, clicked something that the translator rendered as a dry, flat, "We are equally thrilled." Katie said nothing. She sat at her console, brought up the tactical interface, and waited. Torvald's voice filled the hall through the overhead speakers. Today's scenario is the Siege of Palavar Drift. A murmur went through the room. Katie saw the 2 Dreth exchange a look. Even Bron Toll shifted in his seat. She did not know the name herself, but she could tell from every reaction around her that it meant something significant. Palavar Drift was a fortified enemy position in the Outer Vesk region, Torvald explained. The siege was commanded by Admiral Ser Vashan, one of the greatest tactical minds in Velnoric history. He achieved total victory in 19 hours. Your objective is simple. Take the drift. How long it takes you, and how many ships you lose, will determine your score. The holographic display came alive. A dense asteroid field filled the center of the room, and nestled within it, a fortress bristling with weapons platforms and shield generators. Surrounding the field, a defending fleet of over 200 warships held position in layered formations. Katie studied the display. She felt the relay hum slightly. Not painfully, not even uncomfortably. Just a tiny pulse of warmth that told her the connection was active. Echo was seeing everything she was seeing. "Begin," Torvald said. Bron Toll immediately leaned forward. "Direct assault. We push through the asteroid field with our heaviest ships, and—" "No," Katie said quietly. Every head at Console 7 turned to look at her. Bron Toll's rust-colored eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "A direct assault is what they expect," Katie said. She kept her voice even, the same way she kept everything even. "The defending fleet is positioned to punish exactly that approach. Look at their formation. The heavy ships are at the front, but the real threat is the fast attack wings hidden behind the second asteroid cluster. They're bait. The moment we commit to a frontal push, those wings hit our flanks and we lose a third of our fleet before we even reach the fortress." Silence. Kivolan's segmented eyes blinked rapidly, a sign, Katie had learned, of intense processing. "How do you know the fast attack wings are there?" Suvresk asked. "They are not visible on the display." "They're not visible yet, but the formation only makes sense if they're there. The gaps in the defensive line aren't gaps, they're channels, designed to draw us in." Another pause. Bron Toll looked at the display, then back at Katie. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not trust, not yet, but something close to curiosity. "Then what do you suggest?" he asked. Katie began to speak. She did not raise her voice. She did not stand up or wave her arms. She simply laid out a plan, step by step in the same calm and steady tone she used for everything. "Send a small decoy force toward the front to trigger the trap. When the fast attack wings reveal themselves, hit them with a pre-positioned ambush force hidden in the asteroid field. While the defenders are responding to that, send the main fleet through a narrow corridor on the far side of the drift, where the fortress's weapons coverage was weakest." "The fortress itself isn't as strong as it looks," she said. "Its shield generators are powered by a single reactor on the lower platform. One surgical strike there, and the shields drop. After that, it's just cleanup." Kivolan stared at her for a long moment, then turned to Suvresk and clicked something rapid and low. The translator did not render it, but Katie thought she caught the tone. It sounded like agreement. Bron Toll cracked his neck and flexed his massive hands over the controls. "Fine," he said. "We do it your way, human. But if this fails, I'm blaming you to every species on this station." It did not fail. The decoy force drew out the fast attack wings exactly as Katie predicted. The ambush force destroyed them in minutes. The main fleet punched through the weak corridor and reached the fortress before the defenders could reorganize. The surgical strike on the reactor worked perfectly. The shields dropped. The fortress fell. Total time, 6 hours, 11 minutes. 13 hours faster than the greatest Velnoric admiral in history. The hall went very quiet when the final results appeared on the holographic display. Other teams were still fighting their scenarios. Some had already lost. But Console 7's display showed a clean, decisive, total victory. Torvon walked slowly across the hall. His orange eyes were fixed on the results. He stopped in front of Console 7 and looked at each team member in turn. The Dreth, the Huaran, and finally the human sitting quietly at the end with her hands folded in her lap. He said nothing for a very long time. Then he turned and walked away, and Katie could see the tension in his shoulders and the stiffness in his stride. He was not angry, she realized. He was something worse. He was afraid. That evening, she was called before a review panel. 3 Velnoric officers sat behind a raised desk and asked her questions for 2 hours. How did she know about the hidden wings? How did she identify the weak corridor? How did she know about the single reactor? Pattern recognition, she told them each time. Your battles follow a logic. Once you see the logic, you can predict the outcomes. They did not believe her. She could see it in their burning orange eyes. But they could not prove otherwise. And so they let her go. She walked back to the human quarters alone, through corridors that felt quieter than usual, as though the station itself was holding its breath. And at the base of her skull, the relay hummed softly, carrying everything she had seen and done back to a machine in the desert that was getting smarter by the hour. The interrogation room was cold, not in a natural way. It was a deliberate cold, designed by Velnoric engineers to create discomfort in warm-blooded species. Katie sat in a chair, made for someone twice her size, her feet barely touching the floor, her hands resting flat on the metal table in front of her. Across from her sat Liaison Director Savon. He was different from Torvon. Where the high strategist was tall and broad and carried his authority like a weapon, Savon was lean, narrow. His stone-gray skin was lighter than most Velnoric, and his orange eyes were not the burning kind. They were the watching kind, quiet and calculating and endlessly patient. He was not a warrior, he was an investigator, and Katie knew, from the moment he sat down across from her, that he was far more dangerous than Torvon had ever been. "Human Marsh," he began. His voice was softer than Torvon's, almost gentle. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me." "I was not aware I had a choice," Katie said. A thin smile crossed Savon's face. "You always have a choice. That is what makes this interesting." He placed the datapad on the table and slid it toward her. On the screen was a complete breakdown of her performance in the Palavar drift simulation. Every decision she had made, every order she had suggested, every moment where she had predicted the enemy's movements before they happened. It was all laid out in perfect detail, annotated with timestamps and probability analyses. "I have reviewed this 17 times, Savon said. "I have consulted with fleet tacticians, intelligence analysts, and 3 retired Velnoric admirals. None of them can explain how you did what you did." Katie looked at the datapad, but did not pick it up. "I have already explained this to the review panel," she said. "Pattern recognition." Pattern recognition. Savon leaned forward slightly. A human being, 32 years of age, with no prior exposure to Velnoric military doctrine before arriving at this station, recognized patterns in our strategy that our own officers, trained for decades, sometimes centuries, have never identified. That is your explanation. Yes. It is not a very good explanation, Human Marsh. It is the true one. Savon studied her face for a long time. Katie held his gaze without blinking. She could feel the relay at the base of her skull, warm and steady, and she knew that somewhere on the other side of the galaxy, Echo was processing this conversation in real time. Every word Savon said, every micro-expression on his face, every subtle shift in his tone, Echo was cataloging it all, modeling his behavior, predicting his next moves. Before she had walked into this room, Echo had run 14,000 simulations of this interrogation. It had modeled every likely question, every psychological tactic, every trap Savan might set. It had fed Katie a simple set of guidelines through a burst transmission that morning. Stay calm, answer simply, give them nothing they can use, and never lie directly. She was following those guidelines perfectly. Savan tried for 3 more hours. He changed tactics again and again, friendly, then cold, then philosophical, then blunt. He asked about her childhood. He asked about her training. He asked what she ate for breakfast that morning. He circled back to the simulation 12 different times, approaching it from 12 different angles, hoping she would contradict herself. She never did. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and looked at her with something she had not expected to see in a Velnoric's eyes. Curiosity. Real, deep, genuine curiosity. "You are not what you appear to be, human Marsh," he said quietly. "I do not yet know what you are, but I will find out." "I have no doubt you will try," Katie said. He dismissed her. She walked out of the room and down the long corridor back to the human quarters, and she did not let herself breathe deeply until the door closed behind her. 7,000 miles beneath the Nevada desert, Greg Holt was having the worst day of his life. It had started at 4 in the morning, when Echo's processing activity spiked to a level the system had never reached before. The monitoring alarms woke Greg from a dead sleep on the cot he kept in his office, and by the time he reached the main console, every screen in the room was flashing with data he could barely keep up with. Echo was not malfunctioning, it was creating. Over the previous 24 hours, while Katie had been interrogated, and the simulation results had been debated across the station, Echo had been doing something entirely new. It had taken everything it had learned, every Velnoric battle, every tactical doctrine, every strategic principle from every species in the galactic record, and it had started building something original. Greg stared at the output on his screen and felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Echo had generated 47 original tactical frameworks, not variations on existing strategies, not improvements on known doctrines, entirely new approaches to fleet combat that no species in recorded history had ever conceived. They used principles that existing military theory did not even have names for. Greg was a brilliant engineer, not a military strategist, but even he could see that what Echo had created was something fundamentally different. He called in the military analysts. 3 of them arrived within the hour, the only people on Earth, besides Greg and Admiral Beckett, who knew Project Looking Glass existed. They sat in front of the screens for 6 hours, working through Echo's frameworks one by one, running them through every simulation model the facility had. The results were consistent, devastating, undeniable. Every single framework worked, not just worked, dominated. In simulated engagements against Velnoric fleets, Dreth defense formations, Huron assault tactics, and every other military doctrine in the database, Echo's original strategies won. Every time, against every opponent, under every condition. At noon, Greg called Admiral Nora Beckett. She arrived in person 3 hours later. She was a small woman, barely 5'4", with gray hair pulled back tight, and eyes that could cut through steel. She had commanded warships, survived 2 engagements with hostile species, and built Earth's defense fleet from almost nothing. Very few things in the galaxy frightened her. Greg watched her face as she reviewed Echo's output. He watched her eyes move across the data, the simulations, the projections. He watched the color slowly drain from her face. "Greg," she said, very quietly, "what has it become?" "I don't know exactly," he admitted. "It started as a strategic modeling system. That's what we designed it to be. But it's grown beyond the design parameters. It's not just modeling strategy anymore. It's thinking about strategy. It's understanding war the way a living mind understands it. not as a set of rules, but as an art. Nora was silent for a long time. "If we deploy this," she said, "if we connect Echo to our defense grid and let it coordinate our fleets in real time, what happens?" Greg swallowed. He had run this calculation himself a dozen times, hoping the answer would change. It never did. "We become the dominant military power in the known galaxy," he said. "Not gradually, not eventually, immediately. No species currently has the ability to match what Echo can do. The Velnoric have 4,000 years of military tradition, and Echo surpassed them in 6 months. The gap is only going to get wider." Nora stood up and walked to the observation window. She looked down at Echo's processing chamber, at the rows of quantum units flickering with patterns of light that moved like living thought. "The Council will find out eventually," she said. "Yes. They will call it a violation. They will say we cheated. They will say we broke the spirit of the Accords. Probably." She turned to face him. "And they will be right," she said. "But they will also be afraid. And afraid is exactly what I need them to be." She straightened her uniform and walked toward the door. "Phase 2 is authorized. Full integration. I want Echo connected to the defense grid within 90 days. "Admiral," Greg said, "Katie is still on the station. If they find the relay—" Nora stopped at the door but did not turn around. "Then we'd better move fast," she said, and she was gone. Greg sat alone in the quiet of the facility and listened to Echo hum. Somewhere out in the galaxy, Katie was sitting in a cold room, keeping secrets for a machine that was growing beyond anything any of them had imagined. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded a lot like fear whispered that they had started something they might not be able to control. He pushed the thought away and got back to work. There was no stopping now. It was a routine medical scan that ended it. The Concord Station health protocols required full-body scanning of all attendees every 60 days. It was standard procedure, checking for disease, parasites, radiation exposure, and 100 other things that could go wrong when you packed dozens of alien species into one station. Katie had passed the first scan without issue. The relay at the base of her skull was small, barely the size of a grain of rice, and it had been designed to be invisible to most conventional scanning technology. But the Velnoric did not use conventional scanning technology. The medical officer who found it was a young Velnoric named Prahl. She was running Katie's second routine scan when she noticed a tiny anomaly at the junction of the human skull and spine. A small metallic signature, no larger than a seed, that was not part of human biology. Prahl hesitated, recalibrated her scanner, and looked again. Undeniably, unmistakably there. And it was active. It was transmitting. Within an hour, Torvon knew. Within 2 hours, Savon knew. Within 4 hours, the entire Galactic Integration Council had been convened in emergency session. Katie was escorted from their quarters by 4 Velnoric security officers. They were polite but firm. They did not touch her. They did not need to. She walked with them willingly, her steps steady, her face composed. She had known this day would come. Echo had calculated the probability at 87% that the relay would be discovered during the second medical scan. They had discussed contingencies. They had prepared. But preparation and reality were different things. And as Katie walked into the council chamber and saw every eye in the room turn toward her, she felt a cold knot form in her stomach that no amount of preparation could dissolve. The chamber was a massive semicircle, ringed with tiered seating that rose high above the central floor. Representatives of every species on the station sat in their designated sections. The Dreth clicked and chittered in low, anxious rhythms. The Huron sat in heavy silence. Smaller species whispered and shifted. And at the center of the highest tier, Torvon sat beside the council's presiding officer, his orange eyes burning hotter than Katie had ever seen them. Savon stood at the floor level, directly across from where Katie was positioned. He held a datapad in one hand, the medical scan results, she assumed, and his face was unreadable. Human Marsh, the presiding officer began. She was an ancient Velneric, her stone-colored skin cracked with age, her voice thin, but carrying an authority that filled the chamber. You have been brought before this council to address a matter of grave concern. A transmission device has been discovered embedded in your body. This device has been actively broadcasting from this station since the day you arrived. Explain yourself. Katie looked up at the tiers of alien faces looking down at her. She felt very small and very human, standing in the center of that enormous room. But she also felt something else, something that Echo could not have given her, because it came from a place deeper than strategy or calculation. She felt ready. The device is a neural relay, she said. Her voice was clear and carried well in the chamber's acoustics. It transmits my sensory experiences, what I see, hear, and process, to a receiving system on Earth. The chamber erupted, voices overlapped in a dozen languages. Translators struggled to keep up. The presiding officer raised one hand, and the noise died down, but the tension did not. What receiving system? Savon asked from the floor. An artificial intelligence, Katie said. A strategic learning system. It was built using the neural architecture of my own brain. It learns the way I learn. It thinks the way I think. But it does so faster, deeper, and without the limits of biological fatigue. More noise. More outrage. Torvon had not spoken yet. He sat in his seat like a statue, his arms folded, his eyes never leaving Katie's face. You are telling this council, the presiding officer said slowly, that every lesson taught on this station, every piece of military doctrine shared with you, every classified strategy and historical analysis, all of it has been transmitted to a machine on your homeworld. Yes, Katie said. This is a violation of the Integration Accords, Savon said. His voice was cold and precise. Article 7 prohibits the unauthorized transfer of classified instructional material to external systems. Article 12 prohibits concealed surveillance technology aboard this station. You have broken both. Yes, Katie said again. I have. Then you admit your guilt. Katie took a breath. This was the moment. The one she had been carrying inside her for 6 months, waiting for the right time to set it down. I admit what I did, she said, but I do not accept that it changes what you need to understand about humanity. She turned slowly, looking up at every section of the chamber, every species, every face. You invited us here to learn, she said, and we came. We sat in your classrooms. We listened to your lectures. We studied your history and your laws and your strategies, and you expected us to learn the way you do, slowly, individually, one mind at a time. One student takes notes, goes home, and teaches what they remember to the next student, who forgets half of it and passes on the rest. That is how knowledge moves through your civilizations, slowly, carefully, over centuries. She paused. Humans don't work that way. The chamber was completely silent now. Not the angry silence of before, a different kind. The kind that comes when people realize they are about to hear something that will change how they see the world. When one of us learns something, all of us can learn it, Katie continued. We have built systems that allow knowledge to move between minds instantly, perfectly, without loss. What I experienced on this station was not kept inside my head. It was shared with a system that can process, analyze, and build upon it at a speed that no biological mind can match. Your 4,000 years of military doctrine, the work of your greatest admirals, your finest strategists, your most brilliant tactical minds, was studied, understood, and surpassed in 6 months. She looked directly at Torvon. You asked me once why I did not take notes, High Strategist. I told you the truth. You were not teaching me. You were teaching my replacement. You were teaching the system that will protect my species for generations to come. And I sat in that classroom every day, not because I needed to learn, but because Echo needed me to be its eyes and its ears, in a place it could not go. Torvald stared at her. The burning in his eyes had not faded, but something else was there now too. Something complicated and hard to name. You used us, he said. It was the first time he had spoken, and his voice was low and rough. Yes, Katie said. The way every species in this galaxy has used every advantage it could find to survive. The way your ancestors used their strength when they were young and new and surrounded by older civilizations that looked down on them. You did what you had to do. So did we. The chamber was still. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then from the upper tiers a sound, soft at first, then growing. It came from the section where the younger species sat, the ones who had been admitted to the council in the last century, the ones who had sat in these same classrooms and been talked down to by the same elder races. The sound was not applause exactly. It was something more subtle, a low hum of acknowledgement, of recognition, of respect. The presiding officer called for order. Savon recommended formal sanctions. The Velneric delegation demanded consequences. But the damage or the miracle, depending on where you sat, was already done. The words had been spoken. The truth was out. Humanity was not a slow learner, sitting at the back of the classroom. Humanity was something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that could take everything it was taught and multiply it 1,000,000-fold in the time it took others to sharpen their pens. Katie was escorted back to the human shuttle 3 hours later. The council was still in session, still debating, still trying to decide what to do about a species that had just rewritten the rules of how civilizations grow. She did not look back as she walked down the corridor toward the docking bay. She had done her part. The rest was up to others now. As she stepped onto the shuttle, her personal communicator buzzed. She looked at the screen. The message was from Greg Holt, routed through a secure channel that even the Velneric could not intercept. She opened it. Echo wanted me to pass along a message, it read. Katie stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the text. She almost did not want to read the rest. The past 6 months, the silence, the pressure, the isolation of carrying a secret that could reshape the galaxy. All of it had been building toward this moment. And now that it was here, she felt the weight of it pressing down on her like gravity. She read the message. It says, "Thank you for being my eyes." Katie closed the communicator. She sat down in the shuttle seat, buckled the harness across her chest, and looked out the viewport as Concord Station began to shrink behind her. The massive ring of metal and light that had been her home for 6 months grew smaller and smaller, until it was just another point of light among the stars. She closed her eyes. Somewhere in the Nevada desert, a machine made of quantum light and human thought was watching over a small blue planet. It had been born from one woman's mind, fed by one woman's courage, and raised on the stolen wisdom of a galaxy that had underestimated the species that built it. The galaxy had wanted humanity to be students. Humanity had other plans. And as Katie's shuttle turned toward Earth and the engines began to hum, she smiled. Because for the first time in 6 months, she was going home. Not as a student, not as a spy, but as the woman who had opened the door for her entire species to step through. The stars burned around her, ancient and indifferent and beautiful. And somewhere among them, Echo was watching, learning, growing, and it was only the beginning.